I'm one of the planning committee, on the planning committee, along with Peter Bernstein, Mike Yellen, and Abe Butler. And for those of you who are just joining us for the first time this evening, this again was a three-part webinar series that explored the issue of affordable housing in Westchester County. Our first part looked at the history of affordable housing, how we got here. The second part talked about the possible solutions, things that are already occurring, and other ways in which we could find a way to bring affordable housing to all of Westchester County. This webinar was co-sponsored by Irvington Activists, Sustainable Portchester Alliance, and the Westchester Putnam Working Families Party. And our tech for the evening is Raghav Joshi. And today happens to be Raghav's birthday, so let's show him some birthday love in the chat. Also want to make sure that we invite all of you to post questions in the chat throughout the evening, because we will go through that and pick some questions if we have time at the end of the evening with the Q&A. And so without further ado, what I'd love to do is introduce you to Abe Baker Butler, who is going to be your moderator for this evening. Hey, Abe.
Hey, Joan, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. And hello, audience members. It's great to see you. We're very excited for tonight, our third and final session of our three-part webinar series on Westchester's housing crisis. Before I get into what tonight will look like, please take a look at this video from Xochitl Nameka, New York State Working Families Party Chair.
Good evening. My name is Xochitl Nameka, and I'm the State Director of the New York Working Families Party. And I'm honored to be invited to introduce tonight's webinar on the Westchester housing crisis. What an important and informative series this has been. We're witnessing a housing crisis across our state, but especially right here in Westchester, where I live and where I grew up, where 41% of households are cost burdened, meaning that families, our neighbors, are spending more than half of their income just to keep a roof over their heads. It's unconscionable that in the richest country in the world, in one of the wealthiest states in the nation, that anyone should be without safe, stable, and affordable housing. 92,000 people are without housing in New York State, and that number threatens to rise when eviction and foreclosure protections are lifted, which is why it's so important that we're advocating, that we're pushing, that we're fighting for fair and just housing policy now. For too long, we've allowed housing to be treated as a commodity to be bought and traded. We've watched investors profit off of our homes and our communities. Enough is enough. We've seen, rather than raising taxes on the ultra-rich and corporations, the state has left low-income and middle-class families to pay high property taxes. The New York Working Families Party believes strongly, as we all do in this room, that housing is a human right and that no person should be without a stable place to live. We're proud to partner with so many elected housing champions, from the town clerks to city council to the congressional level, that share this vision. I know that you've heard from two of them already in previous webinars, Jamal Bowman, my congressperson here in the 16th Congressional District, and Mondaire Jones up north, both housing champions who know firsthand the importance and right will need us advocating at all levels of government and electing new community-centered leaders who have experienced the housing crisis firsthand and understand that we cannot be a just society until we are all safely housed. We have to dream big. We need affordable, accessible, and green, safe housing for all of us. That is the work we have ahead of us. I hope you enjoyed tonight's webinar. Please continue to connect with the Working Families Party. A brighter Westchester awaits us. Onwards.
Thank you, Xochitl, for that call to action. It is much needed, and we're very happy that you were able to open this session with us. So to provide some more context on this series and why we're here tonight, in our first webinar, we reviewed the history of the housing crisis in Westchester County, the history of racial segregation in housing in Westchester and across our nation. In our second webinar, we discuss solutions to the housing crisis. And today, we have compiled the suggestions that our panelists from that second session, and along with the suggestions that our audience had, into an action agenda document that compiles all of the different solutions that were brainstormed at last session about what outcomes we want to see in terms of affordable housing and addressing the housing crisis. Raghav is going to be pasting this action agenda document into the chat momentarily, so please do peruse it. And our goal in tonight's session is to build on this action agenda document, to take the outcomes that we brainstormed at our second session and to figure out how we turn them into reality. What action steps can we take as activists, as stakeholders, as people in the Westchester community to build affordable housing for all? Now, I'm proud to say that we have with us tonight a stellar, distinguished panel of panelists with experience at various levels of government, in advocacy, and in activism. And as we build on our work from the previous two sessions, we could not have a better group with us. At the end of the evening, we'll look again at the action agenda doc in the chat, and we'll summarize our brainstormed outcomes that we'd like to see, along with the action items that we discuss here tonight. We'd like to keep these sessions interactive, so if you have any ideas for additional outcomes we should look for, or action steps we should take to achieve those outcomes, please put them in the chat throughout this session, and we will add them to our action agenda document. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First off, I'd like to introduce Vanessa Agudelo, Council Member, City of Peekskill, and Manager of Member Engagement at the New York Immigration Coalition. Next, I'd like to introduce Lisa Burton from the Office of County Legislator Damon Marr, and Thebia Hiwa, Senior Vice President of Multifamily Finance and Development at New York State Homes and Community Renewal. Thank you, panelists, to all of you for being with us tonight. We are so glad to have you here to discuss this pressing issue. So panelists, in the same order as above, let's get started. Vanessa, Lisa, Thebia. Here's the question I'd like to pose to you to get us started off. In roughly 3 minutes, can you please introduce yourself and your work and identify one or two affordable housing outcomes or policy changes at any level of government that you see as necessary, impactful, and feasible? So Vanessa, take it away. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Abe. Good evening, everyone. I hope I won't take more than 3 minutes, but please let me know if I'm taking too long. My name is Vanessa Agudelo. I use she, her, they pronouns. I'm really excited to be here and be part of this incredible webinar series with this great group of panelists to have a very necessary conversation around affordable housing here in Westchester County. And as someone who has lived in Peekskill my whole life, it is no news to me that our communities have been facing a very dire housing crisis for very many years. In fact, this became very personal to me several years back when I came back from college after graduating with 2 bachelor degrees and having had many loans and eventually acquired a job with the New York State Senate. I realized that I still wasn't able to make enough money to have my own place in the city that I grew up in. And even though I had been an elected official 3 years into my term, I had no other choice but to live with my parents. And it wasn't until recently that I was fortunate enough to find an apartment that is finally within something that I can afford. But I realized that there's so many people in my situation that do not have the privilege of waiting for something to be available within their income range. And those people are effectively being displaced. So as an elected official who came, I should say, as an activist who came into elected office, affordable housing justice has always been a no-brainer to me. And when CVH, Community Voices Heard, approached me about being part of an effort to lobby our newly elected county executive, George Latimer, to conduct a county needs assessment around housing, I immediately obliged and helped to the extent that I could. And it was really through CVH's leadership and organizing that the county produced a housing needs assessment that was published in November of 2019. And although the report itself did not ignite the kind of action that I think many of us wanted to see from a county level, it did provide us with the data that we needed to go back home and make a case for why these issues were so important. And what this report revealed about Peekskill was, although many things that we knew, we realized that our city was incredibly bad shape. As one of the poorest cities in a county that is one of the richest counties in the country, Peekskill has the highest percentage of renters that are severely cost burdened. And that means that in a population that is majority renter occupied, you have nearly 40% of our tenants that are paying over 50% of what they're bringing home on a monthly basis towards their rent. And this housing crisis isn't just impacting renters. This is across the board. Peekskill has the lowest income for both renters and owners. We also have the highest rate of foreclosures. And the income disparity that exists in Peekskill only continues to build, with almost half of our households earning less than $50,000, and yet a quarter of our households earning over $100,000. So it's very hard for us as a city to be able to catch up when these disparities exist. And although I tried my best to present this information to my colleagues, it was I very quickly learned that data made no difference to people who ultimately viewed housing as a commodity that they could use to manipulate the tax base, instead as a human right that all of us should have access to. And that was made abundantly clear to me when we had a project come forward to the city council about a year ago, where the city had held an immense amount of leverage. We had a developer who wanted to build 2 residential apartment buildings on city property, which meant that we had to sell the land. And my colleagues decided to instead facilitate the building of luxury apartments, despite the clear need that existed in our community. So ultimately, it's really going to take elected leaders who have the political will and have the backbone to stand up for tenants who are currently struggling to make ends meet and to keep a roof over their heads and stay in a community that they have known their whole lives. And that's why I've made recently the decision to recruit a number of community advocates who understand the importance of making this the focus of our agenda, to run for office and to primary my colleagues so that we can finally push forward on policies like the Emergency Tenant Protection Act and good cause eviction, which I recently learned through this webinar is something that can be made possible on a local level. So those are the policies that I'm most excited about. I'm also excited about hopefully recruiting other housing activists across the county to run for office on these policies and really make their voices heard, because it's going to be our collective power that we start to build and we start to organize that will finally bring us solutions that so many of our communities have been facing for so long. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa, for sharing your story and for all of these action items and outcomes that were packed in there. So thank you. Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Burton, and like was said, I am the legislative aide for Legislator Damon Marr, and this is my first opportunity to work in government. So for the past 3 years, Damon has been the chair of the Labor and Housing. So we've done housing seminars, and we've went to the town halls when the housing needs assessment was done for the county, and it was eye-opening to me. I think, like Vanessa, I realized that there were changes happening in Westchester. My family moved to Westchester in '69, and on one civil servant's salary, they were able to buy a home. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. 30 years later, when I got married and was looking for a home, I couldn't buy the house that my parents had. I worked and my husband worked, and we both made 6-figure salaries. And I'm pretty convinced that my sons will pay for a 1 or 2 bedroom condo what I paid for my house 20 years ago. So it seems to me it's completely unsustainable, the way the prices, despite the ups and downs of the cycle of housing, there's something just off about the whole thing. So, and again, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for the legislator, and good Lord, not the Board of Legislators, but it just seems to me that in my brief experience, we get calls from people who have the marshal's notice on their door and have no place to turn. We get calls from seniors who are stuck in these huge homes, but they can't move because the waiting list for senior housing is so long. We get calls from disabled. We get calls from kids who are aging out of foster care and cannot, on a minimum wage salary, trying to get, go through college and find a place. It's impossible. So when I thought of ideas, I thought Mitchell-Lama, to reinvigorate the Mitchell-Lama funding. Mitchell-Lama started in like 1955, and in 20 years, they built over 100,000 units of working class housing across New York. I just, there was an urgency because of the baby boom, and it was done. And I think that is really the key, is the sense of urgency. Certainly this pandemic has shown what people with clear focus can get done in a short period of time. And I think that one of the things that has to get done is that we have to see it for the crisis it is. Right now, I think we are like, they say, how do you cook a frog? You slowly boil the water. And by the time the frog realizes it's being cooked, it's too late. And I think that's where we're at this point, that we have slowly accepted the level of unaffordability. We have slowly accepted the number of our neighbors and family and friends who are always at threat of eviction. We have accepted that people will pay 50% of their income just to live in the communities in which they grew up in. And that we need to make that unacceptable in order to move forward. Thank you, Abe.
Thank you, Lisa. And Fabia.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Fabia Hiwat, Senior Vice President, Multifamily Finance and Development at HCR. In a minute, I'll kind of talk about where that fits in. I feel like I'm in a kind of a unique role in this conversation. And I think a lot of what I want to talk about is what HCR does, what my office and programs that I oversee, what they do, and how we can contribute as these ideas about, policy changes come about. So, I mean, this may be basic, but I'm just gonna quickly kind of talk about what HCR is and what our mission is. And, the mission is to build and preserve and protect affordable housing and increase homeownership across the state. And we do that through working with private and public and nonprofit partners, affordable housing developers, building owners, landlords, banks, community development organizations, and faith-based groups and elected officials. I actually met Legislator Mar at an event in New Rochelle. We work with the federal government and local municipalities. I mean, the list goes on, and because it really does take a village to do this. And so, we have like 5 main areas of focus: multifamily housing, which I oversee, home ownership, community revitalization, rent regulation and tenant protection, which is, part of what we're talking about tonight, which is not my area, but is extremely important as we talk about affordable housing, because it needs to be regulated and have the ability to be preserved. And then also one of the other areas that we focus areas of diversity and inclusion. So we have been charged, HCR, with carrying out the governor's 5-year housing plan. It's a $20 billion homelessness and housing plan to create or preserve 100,000 affordable homes and 6,000 supportive homes for New Yorkers. And it was kind of a game changer when this plan was rolled out, because I come from New York City. I actually live in Westchester now. I just moved here at the end of last year. But I worked for HPD for a number of years, and there was a robust affordable housing through HPD, help affordable housing programs developments. But this housing plan we were able to reach areas across New York State through, our various programs. We'll talk about it in a second. And it's, it's probably just scratching the surface, but prior to this plan, I don't think that there was anything at the state level that was this broad. So, finance and development, we have a number of funding programs. So we're focusing on preserving and new construction and multifamily housing. That's through federal tax credits, 9% tax credits, tax exempt bonds. So I oversee the Housing Finance Agency, and we issue tax exempt bonds. They come with 4% as of right tax credits. And then we have state funded subsidy programs. And I'm just going to look at the spreadsheet here because I wanted to pull up over the housing plan. We've done a little over about 4,200 affordable units in Westchester. And I think two others points, they are in mainly New Rochelle, Mount Vernon, Yonkers, White Plains, Greenburgh, which we've done some things in smattering, and a couple of projects in Peekskill. But, there are other areas of Westchester that I think could use and support affordable housing. And then just in terms of the units, about 94% of the units were up to 60% of AMI. I think there's only one project that had market rate units. And so, I think for my agency, we stand ready and willing and able to facilitate affordable housing development wherever it may be. And we can also be partners. We have development directors in different parts of the state. There's one for Westchester. And, we can help debunk the myths. We can help, identify who the peers are, like what projects, what buildings were developed that can show you what affordable housing actually looks like, that it fits into the neighborhoods, that, it fits in with the community. So I don't know if I took more than 3 minutes, but I will stop there.
Thank you, Thebia. That was very helpful because I think a lot of people, it can seem opaque, the work that housing and community renewal does. And so it's very interesting to hear this description of your work. So the question I want to follow up with is, both Lisa and Vanessa mentioned that many people are spending 50% of their income on housing. And Thebia, you mentioned that in your work, you work on preserving current affordable housing and building new housing units. And we've heard about this on our past two sessions as well. There's the exigency of building new affordable housing units, but there's also the exigency of making our current housing units affordable. So I'd like to put the question out to you, the panelists, about what steps should be taken as activists, as policymakers, from your various vantage points at the city, county, and state government levels. How do we balance these needs for creating new affordable housing units and making current units more affordable? What steps can be taken?
Well, I think one of the first things that we should all be advocating for is a more realistic understanding of AMI in the community. Right now, AMI is based on the entirety of Westchester County. So to assume that someone's average median income in Summers or Chappaqua is the same as somebody who's in Peekskill or New Rochelle, parts of New Rochelle anyway, and Mount Vernon is just wrong. And it prevents, it gives everyone an out to say, oh, we are asking for 80% of AMI, but that means you have to have a salary of like $100,000 in order to have a quote unquote affordable unit. And that is so disingenuous, and it's so insulting to the people who are desperate for housing. So, and it's fictitious. People make rules and act as if it's set in stone, and it's not. So I think that is one of the clear targets. If you have to do area medium income, do it by zip code then, but don't try and lump the entire county because that's just inappropriate.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Lisa on that. Just to add on the comparison, I believe that the Westchester AMI, in comparison to that of Peekskill is nearly a little over half of where the county falls. So that means that, and the AMI tends to be a number that is plugged in for a lot of housing formulas that a number of developers use when they're bringing proposals to municipalities. So that puts communities like Peekskill already at a disadvantage, and clearly and unfortunately it allows for projects to create projects that don't ultimately meet the needs that currently exist in those communities. So I think we definitely need to move forward with not only looking for affordable unit allocations and new development, but also encouraging affordable, 100% affordable developments outright. These are things that we should be facilitating with our zoning, and that we as elected leaders should be seeking out. There is also a number of opportunities in terms of policies that could be moved forward. I know that a number of municipalities have enacted the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, which is something that we have available to us. Peekskill has not been a community that has enacted it, and I know that there's been a lot of controversy around the ETPA in our county, and this is just a false narrative that we really need to denounce outright, the narrative that affordable housing is going to hurt our tax base. This is a narrative that is put forth but maliciously by the real estate industry, that is based in classism and racism, and that ultimately sees people of a certain socioeconomic status as detrimental to society and personal quality of life. So it's something that we really need to call out as it is, and be extremely supportive of continuing to build out affordable housing, as well as support policies that really ensure that we're able to preserve affordability that currently exists.
Yeah, and in dealing with the AMI issue, because I saw that in New York City as well, and seeing that, now in my work with the rest of the state, encouraging projects with deeper affordability is really important. And thinking about the preservation, also the preservation of housing. Well, we, at HCR, that's one of our focus areas, is not only new construction. I think it was Lisa that mentioned Mitchell-Lamas. We are focusing on preserving affordability in Mitchell-Lamas, while making needed repairs, and then extending the affordability on those buildings so that they don't exit the program. So those are really important.
Thank you. So something else that each of you, the panelists, mentioned in your opening remarks was tenant protections, the ETPA, Emergency Tenant Protection Act, the good cause eviction, and Vanessa, how this could be enacted at the local level. So as we hopefully enter a post-pandemic phase, I'd like to pose the question to you of where should we be looking as activists in terms of tenant protection goals and actions that we can take to make those a reality?
So I think so the good cause eviction law is something that's been mentioned, and it is a law that exists on a statewide basis. If it were to pass, this means all municipalities would fall under this law, but it is something that can be passed on a local level. And it essentially gives every tenant in New York State, or would give every tenant in New York State, the right to a renewal lease, and as well as protections against ridiculous rent hikes. So as one of the organizers mentioned earlier, a good way to think about it is like rent stabilization that instead is attached to a unit, isn't attached to an individual. So this is definitely a model ordinance that I think should be enacted statewide. And if it can't be enacted statewide, then certainly on a local level. And I think that we need to start being creative. I think that there were a lot of ideas that were brought forth in the last 2 webinars, creating funds that allow for developers to put money away to account for those who are facing rent arrears in your communities. Because as was mentioned, we currently have a population of renters where nearly 40% of them are paying half of their income to their rent. And these are figures that were published prior to the pandemic. So those stats are probably a lot worse. And they can't wait for more units to be built, right? They need the relief now. And we don't want them to lose the roof that they currently have over their head, especially during a pandemic. So how can we create the resources to get money into those people's hands to ensure that they're not being displaced, especially during these really hard times, and creating programs that allow for these people to create some level of stability, I think is incredibly important. And things I think that we can really get creative about. And of course, it all comes down to a lot of our zoning. I know that recently I've been talking to a lot of residents about ideas that they might have around housing. And, you know, the zoning allows or will not allow for things like tiny homes. And people were like, well, what if I have a lot of land where I want to build a tiny home because my mother-in-law is downsizing and I want to be able to have her live with my family, right? And if we allow for zoning to allow for expanded occupancy by allowing for something like tiny homes, then this is one way in which we can start to bridge that gap and really start to build accessibility for people across all income lines.
I also think it's important to realize that in eviction proceedings, tenants usually don't have an attorney, whereas the landlords do. Actually, the landlords don't show up, the attorneys show up. So certainly right to counsel is important to level the playing field and to make sure that people aren't entering into agreements to get out of evictions that put them further behind and actually make it ultimately not feasible for them to stay where they are. The other thing to think about is that when it comes to evictions, it is so much more expensive for people to lose their home. So, you know, certain municipalities, I believe like in Mount Vernon, they have like a short-term rainy day fund. You know, something happens, you know, your car needs a new transmission, you either get the car fixed or you're behind in your rent. You know, they provide short-term little influx of money, and those are kind of like sensible solutions to keeping people in their homes, and not to, you know, put a burden on landlords. You know, at least the ones that you know aren't in it just to suck the money out of the community, but you know are actually trying to maintain their buildings and everything else. So you know, I think common sense, everything that you would think makes sense is what we need. And we also need strong compliance. You know, landlords who raise rents unscrupulously and either because of language barriers or education barriers, people just don't know and wind up paying exorbitant rents, which is not right. And there's not, it's not widely known how to go about fighting for your rights as a tenant.
I do just want to mention one thing. I noticed, I mean, we were throwing all these names and acronyms around, or maybe I was, and there's a question about AMIs. And so HUD sets the area median income. They have a methodology, and that is what a lot of affordable housing programs use to determine, you know, to set I guess, rent. So it's kind of tied back to this methodology that HUD uses that, you know, on both sides argue that the methodology is wrong. There's some people who think the methodology is fine, but it's HUD that sets the AMI.
Got it. So if we're looking at policy change at the local level, it wouldn't be so much changing the AMI, but changing the percentage of AMI. Just to clarify for our audience.
I mean, yeah, I mean, definitely targeting lower incomes is key. I'm not so up on the discussion about, going to HUD and trying to get them to change their methodology. But at least in this, working with what we have now, targeting the lower incomes is key. And we have programs that target, 30% of AMI. I'm very fond of project-based Section 8 vouchers when available. You have other programs, tax credits, and other ways to target the lower income.
Got it. So panelists, shifting in a slightly different direction here, I'd be interested in hearing from each of you from your particular vantage point, city, county, state, what you see as the biggest obstacles to enacting affordable housing policy change at your level of government. And also, I would pose the follow-up question, how can we overcome these obstacles?
So I can start. I mean, I think to use Peekskill as a case study for our situation particularly, I think what is holding us back from enacting a lot of these really progressive policies around housing, I think is really the political will. And I think it's the lack of creativity around finding other ways to build the tax base outside of displacing those who are currently living in Peekskill and driving in folks that have higher incomes. So I think political will has a lot to play here, but I think it's also worth mentioning that a lot of the issues that our residents, whether tenants or owners across the board are facing, are not going to be solved with 1-2 affordable developments, right? Nor is it going to be solved by any particular legislative policy. A lot of it has to do with resources and years and years of disinvestment that communities like mine have faced that have put us in this place to begin with. So we really need the state and the federal government to step up and to ensure that communities, Black and Brown communities that are that have been disinvested, that are environmental justice communities hosting fossil fuel infrastructure more so than any other place in Westchester County. These are all things that need to be taken into consideration that are all interconnected. And really need to be considered when thinking about these kinds of solutions and realizing that on a local level, we just don't have the resources to solve those problems.
On the county level, Norm Drummond, you had her on the first panelist, and they come up with model ordinances to help local municipalities kind of do the right thing. The county also has like the home seeker, so affordable units, if it's a lottery process that you can apply at one place and have to come from the local level. So if the project on the local level is at 80% of AMI, the county doesn't have that ability to force the issue. It could withdraw funding, but there's a commitment to affordable housing that is out there. So the county is in between the local and the state, and so it's a very hard line, I think, because I think everyone's heart is in the right place, but as the needs assessment came out and it was literally presented to all of the municipalities that were listed in that needs assessment, and it was left to them to come back to the county and do something. Just the urgency wasn't there, and in certain jurisdictions, they feel like they're just fine. They're just fine, and there you go. So, you know, I think I know that the county has the funds and has committed to it, but they need the projects to come from the local level. So.
And so following up on what you said, Lisa, about the projects needing to come from the local level, something that we've discussed in our past 2 sessions is home rule, and how, you know, while there is affordable housing policy change that can be done at the state, federal, county level, as we've discussed, a lot of affordable housing policy does come down to the local municipal level. So with that in mind, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on what the best ways are to share resources and mobilize as pro-affordable housing activists and advocates, given that so much of housing policy is decided at the local level and at different levels of government. What are the best ways for us to mobilize and share resources?
Well, you know, the success that West Hab has with their new project out in Yonkers, I mean, I think everybody should just go see how beautiful that is, and how many units, and say, why can't we have that? You know, and you know, and certainly, I think the real key is also getting other advocates involved. I mean, you know, Sustainable Westchester is really focused on turning the county green. And part of that has to be with housing. You know, you cannot, McMansions are lovely, but they're not sustainable and they're not helpful. So we, you know, there are people who have a different vision for the future for our county. And I think that we limit ourselves by just looking for advocates just in the housing space. I think we need to be looking at advocates who have a vision for a green future. We certainly need advocates who are looking for local gardens and you know, plate to farm within the community, and you know, revitalizing our waterfront and building a resilience. You know, the Resilience Coalition in Westchester is a really strong group, and if housing is not number one on the ACEs score, I don't know what is. So, you know, there's all of these activists out there who have tiny pieces of a vision. And housing kind of undermines all of it, or undergirds all of it. And we need to look to them as well.
Definitely. And Debbie and Vanessa, if I can open up the question to you, any thoughts or additions to what Lisa said?
I do appreciate I mean, I appreciate everything that's been said, but the last point about it not just being about housing, you know, HCR, we are, you know, committed to green buildings. You know, we are a sustainable bond issuer. Our projects, you know, we're working, have a number of initiatives, and I'm getting all the acronyms jumbled up in my head, but Raise the Green Roof, and there's the climate action. I forget all the CLCPA. So we're looking at electrification and reducing the, you know, the carbon footprint. I mean, housing is like, it's health, it's sustainability, it's education. It's like, it's all entwined. And so I think the point you raised, Lisa, is not just housing advocates. There are so many pieces of this where we can bring advocacy together to really force change.
Yeah, I think what I want to add is that It feels like there is this incredible opportunity on a county level now that we've had this Westchester County Needs Assessment to convene all the municipalities in a very intentional way to have this conversation, as difficult as it may be, with housing advocates and people who are directly impacted by these issues at the center guiding this process. And there were a number of great ideas that I think were brought up in the last couple webinar series, such as doing an assessment on land value. Where should affordable housing be built, right? Where are areas in our county that it can be built? And how can we take a comprehensive look at the land that currently exists across our county and see how we can start planning in a way that is sustainable and in the way that keeps kind of these principles at the forefront. I think that that's an opportunity that we definitely have that we shouldn't allow to go to waste, just because people may be, you know, there is kind of this very NIMBY mindset. And I think part of having these discussions and this webinar series is really to push back on that mindset and to get people to start thinking outside of the box and really outside of themselves, and realizing that having affordable housing in your neighborhood is not a bad thing at all. In fact, it calls for, it creates a very healthy environment and ecosystem within our community.
Vanessa, that could not have been a more perfect segue, because the next question I wanted to pose here was, you know, as you mentioned in our past sessions, the topics of NIMBY and, you know, racist resistance to affordable housing and integration came up significantly as obstacles to enacting affordable housing policy. And so zooming out from the policy, I'd love to dig into, you know, what can we do to combat NIMBY and racist sentiment when it comes to affordable housing? You know, how can we put affordable housing as a positive item on the agenda and combat these sentiments?
You know, I think if you go with people's best interests, right? It's in the best interests of people who have senior parents, you know, elderly parents who need someone to come in and help them every day. It's in their best interest to have that person 20 minutes away and not 2.5 hours away. It's in the best interest of grandma and grandpa to have the daycare down the street that they can go pick up their, you know, their grandchildren in an emergency, rather than, you know, having them so far away because your kids can't live in the community that they grew up in. And, you know, and I think the way to think about it is like, what is the community that we want? You know, very soon we're going to have a whole bunch of box stores and malls that are empty, that tore down housing and tore down neighborhoods to build these big box stores and big gallerias. And now they're going to be white elephants. And wouldn't it be great if you had an apartment there and there was the daycare was there and the you know, little health center was there, and your business or your drop-in business where you could do your Wi-Fi and your, you know, stay at home and work thing, and it was all kind of confined and you knew everybody, and it was in the heart of downtown White Plains, or, you know, I mean, there's so many opportunities that we just have to kind of grab at it. You know, no one had a problem knocking down neighborhoods to build the malls and to build, you know, or taking down farms so that we could have these corporate parks. Well, those corporate parks are now empty, and we have all this land, and we have an opportunity to do something so that people can live in the neighborhoods that they grew up in. So why not? It just takes a little bit of imagination and political will, as Vanessa said.
Vanessa or Thebia, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think ultimately community education is such an important piece of all of this. I think having, and what we're doing tonight is very much part of that, right? Having these conversations, educating the public, and really calling to the reality of our communities, making people aware of the struggles that folks are facing. Because when you have, for example, a quarter of our population here in Peekskill making over $100,000, and then you have nearly half of our population making under 50,000. I mean, those are groups of people that are living completely different lives, right? And I think it's when we start to share these struggles and have these conversations that hopefully we can reach some common ground. But of course, that needs to be followed up by policy. And at the end of the day, it's going to take people, leaders, to really enact policy that will ensure that people aren't taken advantage of. Because to be clear, that is what the market is doing. It is taking advantage of people who are trying to live and are unable to do so and thrive with opportunity because they're struggling to keep a roof over their head. And I'm sure many people on these call believe that housing truly is a human right. And when we start acting as though that is the case, and enacting policy centered on that principle, we will finally start to see results that work for our community members.
Thank you, Vanessa. So moving, Lisa, yes.
Yeah, I just want to make one other observation. Everyone always talks about Henry Ford as being brilliant, right? He's the guy who put everyone in the assembly line. But the other thing that he did that was brilliant was that he priced his cars so that people that worked for him could afford it. So we live in a county where increasingly people who work here can't afford to live here. It doesn't make sense. You know, that if we are gonna kind of commit to our county, we need to say we have to have a place for our firefighters, our nurses, our teachers, our techs, our garbage men, our bus drivers, our EMT. Someone recently told me that EMTs don't have healthcare, which I mean, it's the absurdity of all of it is there. So if we can hold Henry Ford as the great capitalist that he was, and his rule was, the cars are priced by what my wages are, because I want everyone who makes a car to be able to afford that car. Well, everyone who lives here should be, who works here should be able to afford to live here as well.
Agreed. And I think it's an important analogy to use and helpful for applying to this context. So the next question I'd like to pose to you panelists is, we've already discussed a number of policies, changes, outcomes, and something that I know I personally have been wondering about, and I think many others on our organizing committee and in our audience have been wondering about it as well, is, when it comes to affordable housing issues and policy changes like what we've discussed, what's the best way to put pressure on lawmakers to act and to turn these policies into reality? Is it creating an organized group? Is it a protest? Is it private meetings with legislators? Is it testifying at hearings? What is it?
All of the above?
I'm going to say the same thing, all of it. Yeah, all of it. Wait, I'm going to go on mute. I hear a child coming.
Yeah, if there's no one thing that will move the needle. I mean, it really has to be everything, and everyone has to be all hands on deck, and the pressure has to be consistent. It can't be, we have a housing crisis today, but tomorrow we're moving on to something else. So.
Yeah, and don't ever let anyone tell you that you shouldn't have an outside game, right? Because I often hear a lot of elected officials, especially those local elected officials that are part of smaller towns, who get really pissed off when you have residents who come to public board meetings and make complaints about something in their community, as if it's not our jobs to hear these concerns, right? Or get really irritated if there's a protest organized against a stance that's been taken on a policy. But this is really all part of democracy. And as an advocate, I do advocacy work on my full-time when I'm working full-time outside of my elected official job. And I've always found it incredibly important to not only be lobbying and cultivating those relationships with your elected representatives, but also building power, mobilizing and organizing other folks, especially those folks who are directly impacted by the issues you're working on, to ensure that you're, as Lisa mentioned, that you're consistently building pressure on your issues, whether it's through outdoor protests, whether it's through a number of emails. I know that in the city of Peekskill, I helped organize when I rang the alarm on the Central Avenue project, where we are going to be selling public land to build luxury apartments with a 1-bedroom starting at $2,200. That is market rate in Peekskill. Market rate in Peekskill is 1 bedroom at $2,200. That is nuts. And that is what my colleagues are pushing forward. And I made that known to the public. I sent out calls to action, and we had over 70 emails from the public sent into the city clerk. And we had a night of a couple of hours where the city clerk had to sit there and read every single email by every single resident. And that made a very big impact in terms of those who were watching the city, the local city meeting. And although it may not be very many that night, it's certainly an issue that folks are now eyeing as being a central component in terms of what determines who's going to be winning this year's election. So it's all these different steps you take to build power. Eventually, it may come to a point where you yourself have to step up, run for office, and kind of take things into your own hands in order to ensure that your community is truly being represented the way it deserves. But it is all part of kind of this advocacy plan that we need to start to build. And we, again, can't be afraid to do that on the inside and on the outside.
Thank you for that, Vanessa.
Yeah, and for localities or municipalities that have land, you know, having a certain set aside for affordable housing, you know, you're in control. Yeah, advocacy around that, it's such a gift to have that kind of resource. And so having a set aside, whether it's 20%, 30%, in some areas I can see the benefit. We'll do some middle income or, a mix of affordabilities. If there's a market rate project, you may have 20, 25, 30% affordable, but to have a full market rate building, in an area where affordable housing is needed. That's.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, it's extremely important and helpful.
Yeah.
And so I want to go back to something that Vanessa mentioned about building power. One idea that was floated in our previous sessions was whether a county-wide group would be efficacious for supporting affordable housing policy. Would it be helpful if when, for example, a policy is debated in Yonkers, which is actually going to be happening, which is happening now, which is going to continue on May 18th. When a policy is debated in a given community, is there a way for people from other communities to come together to support that effort, to share resources? So I'd be interested in picking your brain a little bit more about that, how other communities can, how advocates from other communities can help support affordable housing efforts in communities that may not be their own. And also something that's very important to us as organizers of this webinar series is how we build leadership capacity and center voices of the stakeholder population, the low-income population, affordable housing tenant population. So I'd like to pose those two questions together to our panelists.
I think it's tricky. I mean, even with the best of intentions, if if you're showing up from Bedford to tell Yonkers that they need to build more affordable housing, it would ring a little differently, I think, than intended. So in terms of sharing resources, I mean, I think it's important to share best practices. I think it's important to share, state contacts, and projects that were done well, and missteps, to be able to share that. But I think the people in the community are the ones that are, ultimately have to be the ones to do the advocating, because Westchester is so broad, that there really is, I think the vision of it doesn't sit well in my mind, but that's probably just me. I don't know.
Yeah, it's an important point. Vanessa.
Yeah, no, I actually agree to a certain extent, Lisa. I think no municipality should be telling another municipality what to do, right? Especially if they're not standing at kind of a bigger picture level where they're at a higher level of government. When you have housing policies, it really needs to be rooted and guided by those who are directly impacted by those issues. So if you have a housing policy that is taking place that would make great changes in the city of Yonkers, then it's those tenants who are facing, who are cost burdened, that really need to lead that charge. But I would disagree in that having solidarity built across the county and having housing advocates and local electeds show up to the Yonkers City Hall, and make their voices heard in support of this great policy, I think is something that we should absolutely be building towards. And it actually reminds me of when the village of Ossining was undergoing their fight with the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, ATPA. Myself and a number of other electeds from surrounding areas, and I guess there weren't very many of us, went there and spoke in support of ETPA, despite not being or living in the village of Ossining, because we knew that these were policies that would greatly benefit our communities regardless of the fact, and we understood the struggles that they were facing over in Ossining. So I would be absolutely supportive of building a cohort or an organization that is fighting for housing justice here in Westchester County, and I think it could be a really advantageous way to build power and to exchange those best practices that have also been brought up, and really to start troubleshooting strategy, and as well as policy, and see what's working in some municipalities and what needs to be tweaked, and what could work in other places. So I absolutely think it would be of value.
Certainly. And Thebia, any thoughts on that point? Or I have another question in the hopper that I'm eager to ask. So if not, that's all good.
I think the only thing that I would add, just from in my role, is that, we've done work all over the state, supported affordable housing preservation and development across the state. And it always hasn't been easy. And sometimes it takes, time to kind of build the relationships with the localities. And so I would just say, HCR, we could, we're a resource. We've been doing this for a while, and, we can, our team, regularly interacts with local governments. And so, if I'm not sure if I'm speaking to just the panelists or to everyone, but that's what we do, and we have resources. This is our business. We have their bonds, and there's subsidy. There's not saying that it's abundant. It's well utilized, but we're a resource. I think in one of the earlier sessions, I think it was session number 2, there was a discussion about the IDAs, and buildings that are financed through the IDA, and then they'll be like all 1 bedroom. Well, part of what we look at is, what's the unit mix? What's the affordability mix? What's the unit mix? We have design guidelines. We're kind of looking at the whole thing and not just trying to plop a building. So anyway, that's what I would add.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. So the other question I had in mind is, so this was discussed over the course of the past 2 sessions, and it's also been discussed a little bit tonight. It seems like there's a lot of potential for redevelopment of public land, of corporate parks, of malls and box stores throughout Westchester County that could provide a very good means of creating affordable housing units. And I think to an outsider who isn't familiar with the ins and outs of, what developments and what lands are currently available, it can be very hard to figure out, how do I advocate for the effective use of public land and vacant buildings and units for affordable housing? So I want to put that question to you, the panelists. What can non-elected officials do to encourage the use of public land and redevelopment and rezoning of non-used spaces for public housing and affordable housing?
I think it's a very nuanced question, because a lot would have to, you'd have to really get kind of deep into the going ons of the zoning board, the planning commission, the city council, right? But I think that these are goals. I think we want to be in a place where our communities are regularly engaging civically and are well aware of these decisions that are being made. And I think it's really up to us to get to a place where we're there. But I think being engaged, and if you are aware of a piece of land, and if you have, if you get a group of people together and come up with a plan that might be viable, depending on who the seller is, who owns it, a lot of what will the parameters in which that building can be used or can be redeveloped will be based on the zoning district in which it lays. So having a good understanding as to what zoning district specific buildings are that you might be interested in moving in that direction with is going to be of utmost importance, and advocating for changes to add flexibility to zoning, so that industrial areas that were once zoned off for industry would now include mixed use like residential.
Got it.
You have to be in it for the long haul. Deals take a long time to put together. It's not, you can't have a thought in January and think you're going to be shovels in the ground in December. The financing takes time, the zoning takes time, the EPA, the impact, all of it takes time. And so, the sense of urgency, but patience is also needed when it comes to developing new spaces or rehabbing old ones.
Definitely. Yes, Thebe, were you going to?
Yeah, I was going to build, I think, on what Lisa was saying about the length of time and being in it for the long haul. But again, while you're in it for the long haul, like, this is the time where you can use to try to debunk the myth. I guess I keep saying that. There are so many great examples of affordable housing, and it's affordable to your teacher, your firefighter. We also need low-income housing, and that's not a bad thing. We need supportive housing. When we talk about supportive housing or special groups, yes, we need senior housing, but those tend to be the easier projects to cite. And so this conversation about affordable housing is just so broad. So the advocacy and the education and the relationship building and the more advocacy, and particularly in areas that have city-owned land, or maybe it's not city, but government-owned land.
definitely. Yeah. And going back to what was mentioned before about the long haul and being in this for the long haul, just before we jumped on this webinar tonight, I saw an op-ed in LOHUD about the renewal of New York State's 5-year affordable housing plan, and the importance of that. And now I will admit I did not get the chance to read the full op-ed before we jumped on here because it came right before 7 p.m. But I'm wondering if any of you are aware of that 5-year New York State housing plan, and whether you can speak to its importance.
Yeah, also there was an article about the need for a new housing plan.
Yeah, the need for the renewal of that plan and potential changes actually systemically to how that plan is renewed, whether there's a mandate to renew that 5-year plan.
Oh yeah, I mean, it would be done through legislation. I mean, we are in the last year of the state's housing plan, and even in this last year, the state has committed money to fund programs through this last year. So we received about $186 million for our supportive housing opportunities program. And then I think it was $125 million for our public housing program, because I think I talked about Mitchell-Lama, but we also preserve public housing as well. And then some other funding that I can't recall off the top of my head. I think some went to HHAP, but yeah, I mean, we're definitely looking forward to a new housing plan. I hope there is one. We will do some thinking about, you know, how that new housing plan should look like. But I agree, not just personally because it's my job, but because I think it's important. I think it's important for the state to have additional money to add with the, you know, any money that's coming from the federal government. I mean, you can't. Luckily, this administration, we are looking forward to some money coming to New York State. But you know, I think this 5-year plan has been successful and has really changed the game when it comes to affordable housing, particularly outside of New York City.
Of course, and it certainly seems that way based on the wide array of different fundings that you described as part of that 5-year plan.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the clock and I see that we have recently passed 8:10. So I'm going to move on to some audience questions that have been coming in. Lots of questions from the audience for you panelists. So the first question that I have up here is for Thebia. And so someone from the audience is interested in getting a better sense of how HCR, Housing and Community Renewal, does its work with communities and local municipalities. And they're wondering, Thebia, if you can give us an example of how HCR has collaborated with a community to address the desire for more affordable housing, or has been brought in by a community to consult or help with affordable housing development.
Yes, and of course, now that you're asking me, I'm going to forget exactly where it was. But I know currently I have a staff member that is helping with two different municipalities, helping develop their housing plan. So, you know, providing insight. Because it's important, you know, if you're thinking about maybe revitalizing an area, that you have a plan, because then developers will come to you with anything. So if you, you know, can develop a plan, then there's you kind of know what lines you're coloring in between. So, I mean, that's one way. You know, I know in Western New York, it's hard to kind of to summarize it succinctly, but it was over time, you know, just working with nonprofits, educating the developer community, providing technical assistance. You know, they're just, we've done it in a number of places in New York State, and it's not a one size fit all. But you know, development community, nonprofits, elected officials, helping with planning, providing insight. That's kind of what we do.
I mean, it's very helpful to have this, I mean, to get some examples and hear some clarification of what HCR does. Because I know personally, I think when I think of the state agencies, it's harder to visualize than at the local level.
Yeah, I mean, it's a large agency, and I'm only one part. I mean, I have a counterpart that runs a small buildings program. There's mobile manufactured home program. There's, you know, revitalization programs, and there's so many areas that HCR touches that I'm not even really a part of. And it all contributes to this idea of of affordable housing and supporting communities and just that whole thing.
Certainly. So we also have an audience question here from David Zwiebel. And David, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. But David wants to know, following up on our discussion before about centering stakeholder voices and the helpfulness of non-constituents coming to a local municipality to advocate for affordable housing policy. So he wants to know about how we can center the voices of stakeholders who may work in a community that lacks affordable housing, but don't live in that community because of the lack of affordable housing. How can their voices be centered? How can they be leaders? Should they be leaders in the fight for affordable housing in the communities where they work but do not live?
Yeah, I mean, this reminds me of we have a number of really awesome coffee shops and restaurants in downtown Peekskill, and the baristas that we all know and love, a lot of them can't afford to live here in Peekskill, right? And I think they should very much be part of the conversation. And I don't think that anyone, given the role that workers play in our local communities and local economies, would want to deter anyone from making their voices heard, regardless of whether they live within the city limits or not. So as an elected official, if I were to have a worker come to City Hall and make a statement, that I think would be very valid in my eyes and in many eyes. And I think even taking it a step further, their employers are also in a place where they can advocate to a certain degree, if that is something that they choose to do and use kind of their own political capital to do. And I think when you have developers coming into your communities and they're proposing commercial developments, it's very much up to elected leaders to also say, well, if you are thinking of employing this many workers, where are they going to live? And if there isn't currently housing available for people of these income levels to live, then it's really up for the developer to put forward resources and funds to start to bridge that gap. So these are all questions that really they happen before the building goes up, before workers are even a thought in mind in terms of hiring. But it is something that we all kind of have to be vigilant about when we start talking about any new proposals in our local communities.
Lisa or Thebia, any thoughts on that? Or should we move to the next audience question?
I think Vanessa's absolutely right. If we can insist that developers give us projections on the number of kids in the school district, the number of parking spots that are needed, the impact on our sewage, surely we can ask that be as much of a part of the planning and part of the development, to say that workers who come to these built places will have a place to live. So I think that's absolutely right.
Yes, I know. I speak from personal perspective. I could not agree more as well. The next question comes from Teresa Carrados, who is interested in your thoughts and views and perspectives, panelists, on changing paradigms in public housing and changing perceptions in public housing. So when we talk about affordable housing, what do you see as the future of public housing versus non-government operated affordable housing?
Well, public housing is like the most affordable. I mean, that's affordable housing, and it needs to be protected and it needs to be preserved. And there are a number of ways to do that. I think in the comments I read about, I think someone mentioned, maybe it's the same audience member mentioning RAD. And, you know, there's public housing across the state is deteriorating. I mean, it's not the easiest to maintain if it's left to government, lack of resources, and it's not, you know, lack of funding. And so being able to leverage public and private debt and equity and to reinvest that into the housing stock, I think is important. And, you know, ensuring that, well, in terms of RAD, you know, using Section 8 and keeping those units affordable. You know, it's public housing is important. It's worth fighting for, and it's worth finding and continuing to utilize creative ways to do that. And it's not always a one size fit all. There's RAD and Section 18. I think we preserve through HCR. I have a public housing preservation program, and you know, we use bonds and subsidy to make repairs and preserve affordability. So yeah, it's important.
Definitely. And Lisa and Vanessa, any thoughts on that and the transition through RAD of public housing to private ownership?
I mean, you know, if it was private ownership by tenants, you know, wouldn't that be great? But yeah, you know, I mean, it's if we constantly look at public housing as a, you know, it's like a political football. And when the cycle goes up and the people who think that government should do nothing and not provide a safety net, then it gets starved and we're all the worse for it. But if you had, I mean, I think that's why I have always loved Mitchell-Lama, because you had ownership. If you made more, you didn't have to leave your community. You could stay where you were, just pay more. You could have multiple levels of income and because people want to be part of a community. So, you know, if anything, you know, I would hope that public housing could be like defense funding. No one ever thinks about cutting that. You know, that there's a certain commitment that the country has that we're going to have so much in defense spending, regardless of whether we need it or not. It would be nice if public housing was a little bit in that space and not a football every 4 years. People have to wonder whether their housing is going, you know, the elevators will work because they are starved of resources.
Yeah, and I do want to say, you know, with RAD, it's not necessarily private ownership. It may be private management, but there's still a public ownership piece. Just to make that clarification.
Yeah, and if I could just also add on that, I wouldn't say that I'm an expert on RAD whatsoever, but it is something that we do have a public housing authority in the city of Peekskill, and it's something that we have also, or I should say the PHA is considering. And from the research I've done, this is kind of a rather new program, or relatively new, where in like 15 years, the program were sunset, and within those 15 years, you'd have private management that's devoted resources into kind of renewing the housing development. And then there would be a choice as to whether that could be turned over and made private housing as opposed to kept public housing. And the problem with the program, and again, this is kind of like a federal case study, is that in some circumstances there would be a lot of obstacles for residents who are going back into their housing units to get back in because they weren't able to provide the right documentation, or it was too many hurdles. I'm not sure if this has been the case for some of the housing authorities in the state of New York. But it is something that I think we need to keep an eye on. And I agree, I think preservation of public housing is of utmost importance. And instead of trying to find private partnerships to kind of alleviate these problems, it's really up to our government. It's really up to our federal government to invest the resources needed to ensure that people are not living in substandard housing, and that folks have a high quality of life regardless of what income level they currently have. So that is something that we should be prioritizing and pushing for.
In New Rochelle, the one of our municipal housing complexes did undergo a RAD. And one of the biggest things was, yes, the original tenant was the grandma, who's no longer living there, but their daughter and the son had been living there, but now they're at the bottom of the list. So when the buildings came down, they had to move. The other thing that happened was that gas and electric were all included in the old housing project, but under RAD, the new complexes, you now had an electric, now had a Con Ed bill. But you still had to pay the same, 30%. So that was another chunk of money out of it. And it had an impact in the community that people are still reeling from.
I can imagine it would be a significant impact from something of that scale. So unfortunately, this will be our last audience question due to time, but we have an audience member who would like to have a brief explanation provided by the panelists on Mitchell Lama. So if anyone would be willing to take a stab at that, maybe Lisa or Vanessa or Thebia, we will conclude after that.
Well, I mean, I know Mitchell Lama because my husband's aunt lived in Mitchell Lama housing on Riverbend. And, I did not realize it was Senator Mitchell and Assemblyman Lama. That's actually two people who thought that we needed to have housing. And it was part of the, baby boom in the 1950s. They went full force and they created all of this wonderful housing for firemen and teachers and just regular people from, upstate to, we all know down in the city, but it was great housing. And they had sunsets of 30 and 25 years. And then people started tweaking it, and then it'd be 15 and people wanted to go private with it. But it was good housing in nice neighborhoods near schools, and it checked all the boxes. And it's they created 100,000 units of affordable housing. What you put in, you got out. So you're not going to make, you're not going to make 2,000% on your apartment. But what you put in, you'll get out of it. You could stay there, whether, when you retire, you could stay there. You didn't have to leave when you got a promotion. You just had to pay more. And it provided stabilized housing for people who had upwardly mobile aspirations and for people who were retiring. So, what could be wrong with that? And yet, I have not, W, you probably know for sure, but I have not heard of a new project going up since Governor's Island. That was the last, in Queens, that was the last one I have heard of. I have not heard of one since. And that was in the 80s, 70s, 80s, right? So.
Thank you for that explanation, Lisa. I think it really clears up a lot of what people were wondering about Mitchell Lama. And to those in the audience, thank you for bearing with us as we've thrown around so many different acronyms and names of bills and legislation and programs tonight. Thank you for bearing with us. Before I close, I'd like to have Raghav share the action agenda document. So Raghav, are you able to share that? So hopefully you can all see this, audience members and panelists. Oh, that is not the action agenda. But so as I said, during this panel discussion, Peter Bernstein and Michael Yellen, two of my co-organizers, have been dutifully organizing and writing down all of the action steps and policies that our panelists have discussed. So we can take a brief scroll through this and take a quick look now. But in terms of next steps, this may be the last panel discussion of this, the end of our affordable housing advocacy work together. Based on this action agenda that we have crafted tonight, we, the organizing committee, will be sending out a follow-up email with a finalized version of the action agenda, as well as next steps for action to build affordable housing and to address the housing crisis in our county. So please stay tuned for information about a potential working group, for information about potential initiatives, for information about upcoming ordinances and policies to advocate for, such as the new 20% set aside proposal in Yonkers. Please keep your eye out for an email from us about all of that. I can't tell you how grateful we are for you being with us for this series. Thank you to our panelists for being here, for providing such stellar insight, and for providing us such education about the status of affordable housing in our county and how we can work to improve it. And with that, I wish everyone a good night. I think we're about on schedule. Yes, 8:31, 1 minute over. But thank you again for coming. This is the beginning, not the end. And I wish you all a great night. Thank you so much, everyone.
Hey, Vanessa, you gonna hang out a minute?
Yeah, I can.
Hold on to me as we go, as we roll down this unfamiliar road. And although this wave is stringing us along,
That was really good. The whole thing.
'cause I'm gonna make this place your home. Settle down, it'll all be clear. Don't pay no mind to the demons, they fill you with fear. The trouble in might drag you down.
There are still some panelists, some attendees on the line. Do we want to just have an open discussion with them?
Oh, we are now.
There are
Oh,
still
I think-
some attendees on the line. Do we want to just open it up and have a conversation? Does
Sure,
anyone
Joan,
have
I
energy for that?
John, I think that's an intriguing idea. I'm down if others are.
Yeah, I can hang for, I mean, let's, 15 minutes. Doesn't have to go on forever.
Definitely. So for those that are still on the line, if you would like to join a post discussion with us, please raise your hand and I will make you a panelist. Okay.
There's a special prize. I just dropped our playlist into the chat.
Yes.
For
Includes-
those who hung out.
yeah, which includes some tunes that never made it, because we only
Yes,
had
onto,
two
yes,
before.
Yes.
yes. Awesome, Peter.
The playlist is stellar. Thank you, Peter, for creating that.
So do we have anybody? I thought I saw Damon.
Yes, so I see Damon and Patty. And if anyone else would like to join us, just raise your hand and I will elevate you.
Yeah, I wasn't really looking for anything intellectual. I just digging the music.
Yeah, good.
Ah,
Well, let
Well,
me
now
know what
you
you
have
think
the
of the
link.
rest of the playlist.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm very, I like this policy stuff. I like change, but if it's got to be like music, food, and alcohol involved for the full
Mhm.
experience.
Yes.
Of course.
Damon, you've got a wonderful staffer in Lisa Burton. She was so impressive tonight. I don't know her. This is, really my first exposure to her, but she said so many important things.
Oh my gosh. I hope she's not still on because she'll be embarrassed. But
He's not.
first thing I did after I got elected was hire her, and that's still the smartest thing I've ever done in politics. Yeah, just she really has taken the issue to heart and run with it. And I hope we can do something concrete or more concrete in county government. And she I think she went as far as she